Welcome to Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. I'm Ron Scholl. Last time on Gas, officials declared two of the four criteria to allow reentry satisfied, with a 100% certainty that no chlorinated compounds migrated off-site, and claimed that the white dust was not harmful, though samplers said they could not find any white dust to test. The main struggle remained to empty car 3 of chlorine. We now continue with Part 1, Chapters 27 and 28. Chapter 27, One Stinkin' Tank. Wednesday, April 24. At 5 a.m., Team Leak drilled the first of 20 holes edging the patch plate, through which they would inject a seal to try and stop the leaks. Early morning, Watts, Way, Waldron, and MRL's Operations Chief John Grewell met at Forward Ops. They needed the patch to hold to take the chlorine out as liquid. Way, if we have sustained pressure and we try pumping in pressure, we could blow the patch. Grewal, once the patch is holding and the product is being moved, we can open I-90 in the town. But that would change another criterion and add risk. Waldron, I don't think that people are going to come home until tank car 3 is empty. Yet Waldron agreed we need to reopen I-90 as soon as possible. Way, we could give DOT a window to work with. During the day, we have 95% control on the chlorine. We can control traffic. It is my recommendation to open I-90, with chlorine still offloading. Watts, I think we can open I-90 and see how the patch works to re-enter Alberton. Even as they seriously considered reopening I-90, they did not understand the dynamics of the off-gassing. Way, something is not making sense. Grewal, the heat applied to the tank is making the gas leak from the patch. Way, the soil area, looking into other incidents, this doesn't behave. It doesn't make sense that there is chlorine in the soil. Maybe the chlorine is pooling under the tank. I-90 remained closed. By 10 a.m., Team Leak began injecting Pookie, a Teflon-based sealant, into the patch holes. By noon, an estimated 7 tons of chlorine had been removed, with an estimated 20 tons remaining, based on the dropping ice level outside the car. Steam was applied to the head end to try and get the pressure to 5 to 10 psi. The techs again nixed a liquid transfer. If we start the liquid transfer and blow off the patch, they said, we will really be in trouble. Wind and rain continued intermittently. There is a lot of gas coming out of the wet soil now that the rain has stopped, they said. The techs seemed certain chlorine was still in the soil. This began a long stretch of transfer by vapor. Video taken on April 24 revealed the techno tableau. 6 men worked on site in level B with others in level A close by the tank patch, perhaps drilling holes for the Pookie. As rain fell, a gusty wind blew wisps of gas or water vapor to the east, away from where the tank was steamed. The scene was cacophonous, a ratcheting compressor, the wind, radio traffic in headsets, and the constant overlapping beeps of personal chlorine monitors. Ringed by brown trees, hazards abounded. Debris, sharp metal, aluminum bars, trenches gouged by the derailment and clearing work, and ubiquitous mud. One stinkin' work site. At the evacuee meeting, Waldron reported some high levels of chlorine, but did not mention the earlier cloud formed above Alberton. Watts said, in 30 hours, only a small amount of product was removed. If the patch didn't hold, reentry would be Sunday. MRL noted, livestock in the hot zone have not been evacuated as proposed at yesterday's meeting. To do so would halt unloading operations at the site. Animals in the hot zone are not in danger at this time. The pet and livestock feed may proceed as scheduled this coming Friday morning, they said. This rationale was utilitarian, yet MRL said yesterday they wanted the animals out, quote, due to the elevated chlorine levels in the air. McMeekin later reported, there have been spikes at the site this afternoon. Due to the wind, we are having higher readings at mile marker 72. Winds at top 45 miles per hour. The monitor was blown over at the site and broken, he said. With the heavy rain, the Terrace View escape route was a quagmire, with a cat and dump truck stuck in the mud, along with a patrol car. Residents of Ponderosa Acres would have to escape west to access I-90, just as on the morning of the spill. Petty Creek South Pass was also blocked again. Spikes continued. The animals remained. Thursday, April 25. Overnight spikes reached above 100 parts per million at the East Red Tape Barrier. At 2:30 a.m., MRL reported the steam boiler shut down because of high chlorine levels. They noted the vapor transfer won't work because at 3 psi there is too much chlorine leakage from the patch and it burns out the boiler on the diesel Corkin compressor. As rain fell intermittently, the boiler was used on and off throughout the night. That morning, the techs yet again discussed transferring the chlorine as liquid. MRL's Grewal told Incident Command there is no stable environment at this time. Team Leak had ordered stronger Pookie. McMeekin, they are working in a deadly atmosphere in Level A. They need our support. Grewal, we don't want to turn this mess into a disaster. They needed some other way to seal the patch. New ideas included inflating a balloon in the tank, smoothing the edge of the hole, replacing the patch with new steel, and welding the patch to the seal. Eventually, 8 or more chains were wrapped around the tank. By noon, Watts told IC the key to the whole operation is the patch. At this time, the process is at a standstill. Yet again, they considered the animals left behind. Waldron, leaving the animals in the hot zone any longer can create an issue. We say the readings are high, then they are down, then they are high. Better just to remove them from the hot zone and it will no longer be an issue. A belated point. Today was day 15 for animals left behind. Animals had nowhere to escape if they encountered intolerable or frequent low-level conditions. Their contract with humans continued to be broken. Weiss recalled a lot of concern and lots of discussion about the animal welfare on the site, he said. We had several veterinarians involved, observing animals for chlorine effects. We just didn't know how long this thing was going to go on. I think there was a discussion of, wouldn't it be easier if we moved all the horses and cattle and llamas, whatever people had, to a central location where people could visit? Ultimately, we did not need to do that, he said. Animals in the hot zone endure repeated exposures. Weiss told the Missoulian, surprisingly there was little evidence in the animals, some of which were right across the street from the derailment for 17 days. There was very little clinical evidence of problems. Yet, Weiss later admitted that on as many animals as we could get, we did lots of biomonitoring, some showing fairly severe effects on animals. We saw some bleeding. We saw rhabdomyolysis, which is a breakdown of muscle that comes from, if you're oxygen deprived, your muscles can begin to break down. If an acute exposure to chlorine gas was inhibiting your ability to breathe. It looked like some of these animals had experienced a type of dry land drowning. Fluid leaks back into your lungs. It would cause what's called hypoxia, or a reduction in the amount of oxygen in your blood. He also noted evidence of perhaps some ocular damage. Weiss added, that was important information to me because it helped me understand that humans that had been heavily exposed acutely probably had similar effects. Many animals in the hot zone likely had initial exposures similar to what the train engineers and highway travelers experienced, which had landed many in critical care. Then animals left behind had exposure to ongoing releases. Likewise, animals in the exclusion zone likely had initial exposures similar to the humans that fled. Many of these animals were left behind, while many people reported smells and symptoms during brief visits. Like humans, animals could become sensitized. Why continue to expose the animals at all? The first treatment, as with humans, was removal from exposure. The final decision was to not remove remaining animals. The only public explanation was to do so would halt unloading operations at the site. Animals in the hot zone are not in danger at this time, MRL said. Yet, significant gas releases continued. No one fully tracked the health of pets or livestock removed or left behind. The animals left in the hot zone were at greater risk to ongoing exposures than the protected crews that fed them. Even the animals outside the broad hot zone were likely getting occasional doses at low levels. The animals lived in the hot zone and exclusion zone around the clock, most out of doors and some close to the site. Any risk to residents visiting them was unnecessary, and if animals needed to be evacuated in a big release, there would be a risk to people in moving them out. In fact, in a serious release, the animals would likely be left behind again. Realistically, any animals left in the path of a major chlorine gas release should have been considered expendable. As the incident dragged into a third week, Incident Command announced internally that Steve Way becomes one of the unified incident commanders. The EPA officially shared the reins on day 15. That afternoon, the techs reported a new tap hole was drilled for liquid transfer on the low end of the car, ready if needed. With the Stinger, they now measured 45.5 inches of product left, an estimated 12.5 tons. The level was significantly less than the estimate of 20 tons a day earlier. Because of the encouraging level, the text said, the group decided to go back to fixing the patch and transfer vapor using air compressors. Slow, but we know it will work, they said. Liquid transfer was finally eliminated as an option. But, the text noted, according to the titration on the caustic cars, an estimated 5 tons of product have been removed. The amount of caustic used to neutralize revealed the level of captured chlorine. Disconcertingly, they noted, it is estimated as much product probably leaked out as was pulled out. This partly explained the so-called encouraging rate of removal. They were cooking half into the atmosphere. We have a problem knowing the amount of product that was in the tank before the transfer. There are estimates of 53,000 to 35,000 pounds, and no one knows. Tomorrow, we will have a number on the product that remains. Because of the uncertain math, Way said, it is unknown at this time when the chlorine will all be removed. Possibly we will need to change the criteria of the reentry into Alberton. If we can manage the chlorine in a controlled environment, we could change the criteria. That is, to allow reentry before all the chlorine was transferred. Yet, he said, the way it is now, there is no assurance that we can stop the off-gassing. Car 3 cooked like a leaky cauldron. Friday, April 26. Full steam ahead. Early morning, Grewal briefed, I think we will have the product gone in 6 to 8 hours. Watts, Alberton reentry could be set for Saturday or Sunday. At 11 a.m., the techs reported the frost line on the tank was still dropping. The techs planned to peel more jacket away today to get heat in as close as possible as they steamed. At some point, the steamed area was wrapped in a plastic tent to help hold the heat. The leaky patch looked better than it did last night, they said. Something was making a difference, perhaps stronger pookie. But other leaks developed. At 11:50 a.m., the chlorine was not mixing well in one of the caustic cars, liberating free chlorine from this car, the text said. They shut the receiving car down and replaced the valves. At Friday's evacuee meeting, Watts reported only 5 tons were estimated left in the tank. MRL President Bill Brodsky announced the anticipation of possibly finishing Car 3 today and allowing people to return on Saturday. But at 6 p.m., the text noted, we have now determined that we have 46 inches of product still in the car. Because of the angle of the car, earlier measurements were inaccurate, the measuring stick hitting the side of the tank. They now estimated 13 tons remained. The techs estimated finishing by 5 a.m. Saturday. Once all the liquid was vaporized, pressure would drop and they would flush the tank for 4 hours with air to displace any remaining vapor. For now, readings remain, quote, significant on I-90. Watts, there is concern that there could be a major breakdown in equipment. The patch is leaking some, but the pressure is holding at 4 pounds. On this eve of tentative reentry, leaks continued, with more than double the chlorine left than earlier thought. At 11 p.m., peaks rose to 25 to 100 parts per million at both the worksite decon area and the north red tape barrier. Despite the efforts of expert cooks, the oven simply leaked. Chapter 28. Going Home. Epigraph. We have changed the terminology of the reentry to going home. Incident Information Officer. Friday, April 26. At the morning briefing, Chris Weiss warned, there is some concern for the residents of the home closest to the spill site, about 150 yards away. Sylvia Bookout's daughter, Kelly Johnson, had a history of serious respiratory and immune problems, Weiss said. She was seriously exposed to the chlorine at the time of the spill. There is some question when she should return to her home. The smell of the Cresslate. The odor. Steve Way. The smell up there can be attributed to this incident? Way seemed surprised. Weiss. I don't know how the smell will impact her condition. Johnson had a family as well as nearby neighbors. The area will be opened, Way said. We need to determine if Olympus has taken samples. Way wanted risk-based numbers. He said any release of chlorine from the soil during excavation wouldn't be significant, adding, the Cresslate smell. There are no viable compounds. They won't be released into the air. Someone at the meeting said, the people on the west side of Natural Pier Bridge, they may be out longer than the residents in Alberton. Way, there is no reason why they can't go through. The odor of the Cresslate does not present a health issue. Weiss, I think you will have to coax them to come through the staging area at Natural Pier Bridge. Watts, west of the bridge, leave those people out for a couple days. Way acquiesced. Watts, there will be a grace period for residents to stay at motels. Kelly Johnson seemed a perfect candidate for avoiding the area. She lived close to the site, had a significant exposure, had pre-existing respiratory and immune problems, and she may have become sensitized. How close to the site would residents react to any odor? And what was Way's understanding of the potential symptoms, especially for sensitized people? Way reflected, in my experience, it's going to be virtually certain that you're not going to measure a concentration of a semi-volatile compound 150 yards away at a location and concentrations that would be something we could say is going to be a problem for somebody. Such levels wouldn't meet a regulatory limit or even a health or recommended level, he said. As Way said earlier, I will stake my career on it that this soil poses no health threat to Alberton. If the EPA thought it safe to return home, then any further complaints were left for MRL to sort out, not health officials. Later that morning, the information officer announced, we have changed the terminology of the reentry to going home. Officials planned a welcome home Alberton sign. At a noon evacuee meeting, Watts announced a 9 a.m. Saturday meeting to finalize the going home process. Leahy assured any chlorine smell highly unlikely. There should be no pockets of chlorine in your house. If you smell chlorine, ventilate the area. Referring to chlorinated water, she said, you may be sensitive to chlorine smell for a while. She added, you may continue to have symptoms. Get in touch with your healthcare providers. As for other site chemicals, you may notice some smell. Some do, some don't. There may be a residual smell. Leahy assured safety while leaving it up to residents to assess odors and any need to clean. It should be safe for your children and your pets outside, she said. MRL President Bill Brodsky came to this meeting and apologized for the, quote, inconvenience of the derailment. We're here for the long haul, he said. 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, we'll be here. We won't forget you. Friday afternoon, Leahy went to Alberton with Weiss to check on the town. At the Sportsman's Bar, she noted, no smell. This was Leahy's first and only visit to the exclusion zone. Years later, she claimed nobody went in there on any regular basis. Chris Weiss took me in there after they were done on Car 3, and nobody had been in there. I had to get special clearance to go in and had to go in with him. Leahy claimed to be unaware of ongoing visits by residents to the exclusion zone, despite the clear public announcements at the time. Weiss didn't recall smelling chemicals on this visit to Alberton. We didn't, and we spent hours in town going from building to building, he said. Saturday, April 27. Spikes continued into Saturday in the hours before the planned re-entry. A line break at the caustic receiving car occurred 3 times in the last 24 hours. At 7 a.m., Watts reported to IC, pressure is dropping, means that only gas left. The liquid is almost gone. We have no measurement available at this time. It will take approximately 4 hours to process the gas from tank car 3, he said. The 4 criteria were deemed satisfied. Way gave approval for re-entry. Bible Lane south of the river would be opened at 12 p.m. and Alberton at 2 p.m. Way kept I-90 closed for now, but Roadblock 4 would move back to Sear from Fish Creek. Sawmill Gulch would open, but residents would have to use the long detour for access today. The area west of Exit 75, including Plateau Road, would remain closed for now. Basically, areas within 2 miles of the site remain closed. I-90 would reopen Sunday, but only between 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. daily, as recommended by Way. Roadblocks would be maintained at Sear and Exit 75. IC warned, in the event that monitors detect chlorine gas levels above acceptable standards, I-90 will have to be closed immediately. Way announced the re-entry at a special 9 a.m. evacuee meeting. I am confident that the specialists are near the end of offloading Car 3, he said. The bulk of the soil will be staged on site and covered to be transferred off-site at a later time. Watts said the partial re-entry is not mandatory. You can wait until tomorrow. The sparse record of the Q&A session reflected a litany of assurances by the panel. All derailed cars would be empty before moving off-site, safe to transport by houses. Modeling of the initial release was still promised. People with asthma should be safe. And regarding contamination concerns of homes, Leahy assured, "We believe it's safe before we let you back in." Way assured that the soil left behind, though it has odor, was no concern for airborne exposure. When someone asked about any increase in railroad maintenance, Watts replied, MRL has a high standard for maintenance. MRL's Brodsky also reported in the paper, those persons most seriously affected initially by the chlorine onset are getting better. Recovering health, safe homes, safe levels of odors, safe levels of chlorine, safe environment, safe empty tanks, and a safely run railroad. All of these assurances would later be questioned. As spikes continued, the earlier assumptions about little or no liquid chlorine left in Car 3 had been wrong. At 11:20 a.m., the EPA's Mike Zimmerman told Waldron a disconcerting revelation in light of all the assurances made about reentry. There is no reliable information on the amount of chlorine liquid left in tank Car 3, he said. I was just told that there could still be 7 to 8 tons left in the tank. Waldron, does this make the situation any less stable? Zimmerman said no, without explanation. Waldron, we have an evacuation plan in place for the Alberton residents. Nothing has changed. The only issue is I-90. Waldron said they might have to tell residents Sunday morning that the chlorine is still being cooked. I-90 may still be closed west of exit 75. Waldron, the whole key to this issue, the situation is stable. Though Car 3 could have 7 to 8 tons of liquid chlorine left, not just vapors as thought, and continue to leak, officials didn't think conditions were any less stable. But it was unclear how the situation was any more stable than yesterday, when the exclusion zone closure was still in effect. Once again, decisions on a re-entry had been made without full and accurate information. At noon, as Bible Lane was reopened, the techs gauged Car 3. The frost level was measured at 26 inches, they said. Still unsure, but it is estimated at 3 tons. An hour later, the techs reported, Car 3 has lost all pressure, but still has 26 inches of product in it. Hoses have been breaking open. At the Plateau Ridge fixed monitor, a few peaks passed 8 parts per million around 12:30 p.m. Around 1 p.m., Waldron, Way, Leahy, and others met again. Waldron, the liquid chlorine is not gone. The situation is stable, per Steve Way, EPA. They are still cooking the chlorine. This broke the criterion on the chlorine being gone, though officials referred to stability. But the situation hadn't changed. Liquid remained and gas still leaked. The decision to partially reopen was based on the belief of only vapors remaining in Car 3. Residents returning home today were not told this. As Weiss earlier stated, some people wouldn't return until the chlorine was all gone, as officials had promised. The 2 p.m. Alberton re-entry went on as scheduled, despite the leaky cauldron. Weiss didn't recall later that any liquid chlorine was left on Saturday. I don't know that that was the case. The chlorine would have been dissipated by the time we brought people back. The log said it wasn't until Sunday morning that the chlorine was down to vapors, long after most people had been allowed to return. That actually surprises me, Weiss said. Weiss acknowledged, with any chlorine at all in the tank, it was burping lethal concentrations. I mean, the reason we couldn't bring people back in was because there were uncontrolled concentrations of chlorine leaking for 17 days. Bubbles of chlorine would come out and spike way above lethal concentrations and float across the highway. Saturday, those conditions had not fundamentally changed. An evacuation plan was ready, just in case. IC reported, EPA concluded the risk to the city of Alberton was over. I-90 is still closed due to chlorine spikes carried by wind from the site. With liquid chlorine cooking in Car 3, the reentry went on as otherwise planned. Missoulian reporters accompanying people returning to Alberton captured some residents' thoughts and feelings on going home. They wouldn't have let us back in if it wasn't safe, Ray Murfin said as she checked on her outdoor cats left behind. MRL has done a great job all along. It was an accident. Nobody wanted this to happen. Terry Fairbanks reported no smell in her house, but was concerned more of the long-term effects of the chlorine, she said. In the paper, 3 other families expressed joy at returning, reporting no damage other than burnt tips of tulip leaves. Many people expressed gratitude for the work of MRL, emergency workers, and officials. There was no report on what percentage of residents returned today. The only published grumble came from artist Jabe Jackson. You want to say it's just a dream, but then you realize it's been a nightmare, he said. Alberton's always like a cheap novel. Then it turned into a cheap, surreal novel. Jackson's next metal sculpture might be based on Edvard Munch's The Scream. A chlorine scream, maybe, he said. Unlike his Friday visit, Weiss did notice smell in Alberton this day. You could smell creosote, he said. I can see how it would be annoying to someone. And again, MRL was also bringing in, I don't know the exact dates they brought in railroad ties, but they were getting ready to rebuild that rail. So it stacked brand new, dripping wet, creosote-laden railroad ties all along the track. He described creosote odor as sort of a sickly sweet, to some people nauseating type of smell. And the stronger it gets, the worse it is. But Weiss didn't recall residents complaining to him this day. When it got warm and heated up, there was more odor, and that waxed and waned throughout the first few days that people were back there, and went on until the soils were removed, and even after the soils were removed, Weiss said. Site-related smells reached Alberton, 2 miles east. Far and away, he said, most people were glad to get home, get their lives back to normal. There were many people that were upset, but they were not the majority by a long shot. The biggest concern was just dealing with the post-traumatic issues associated with being evacuated from your home under life-threatening conditions. But for many, the biggest issue by far would be their long-term physical health. At 3 p.m., MRL noted readings of 4.5 parts per million were detected near the East decontamination site. An MTech contract employee had, quote, tightness in his chest and was taken to community hospital. Car 3's pressure had risen to 4.5 psi, a further indicator of liquid chlorine. At the night shift briefing, Waldron reported, the chlorine is still cooking. It is unknown when the process will be done. Nate Nunley, Missoula Rural Fire Department safety officer, said, it is still unstable at the site. It is spiking at night. The information officer reported that during the day's reentry, officials received 7 monitor requests and 1 request for ventilation. This was the extent of official details about the reentry. No reentry survey was done, despite all the red flags during visits and the many complaints and fears. Mineral County Commissioner Charlie Rock said, 75% of the residents returned to Alberton. But Steve Way wrote, most residents waited until Sunday, April 28, when the offloading of chlorine gas was completed. Either way, residents had not been told that liquid chlorine remained cooking. McBeacon warned that for the next 24 hours there could be an evacuation at the work site and the forward command post. In the case of an Alberton evacuation, he said, the town siren will blow and residents are to make an orderly exit. An orderly exit to the shock of another evacuation would have been highly unlikely. There is still chlorine in the air, he said. The people at Sear need to be on their toes. This included the roadblock and any residents now back in Sawmill Gulch. Claims of the situation being any more stable than previously appeared unfounded. Residents returned under the belief that liquid chlorine was gone, unaware of any evacuation contingency. Jess Mickelson recalled, you could walk up to the tank up until the last day when we finished pumping everything off, and it's 50, 60 parts per million constantly. Throughout the evening, transfer continued. At 11:30 p.m., a line ruptured. The RV park, 2 miles east of the site near the river, had a peak of 0.4 parts per million, a short-term level of 0.2 parts per million, and a time-weighted average of 0.1 parts per million for about 24 hours, beginning the evening of April 27, when that area had been reopened. A steady, low-level bath. Car 3's remaining liquid chlorine was not stable. Lucinda Hodges and a few others from ACE met with MRL's Dan Watts and claims officer Alan Anderson a couple times, including today. ACE had collected handwritten notes from residents expressing health concerns. ACE noted to MRL that people re-exposed to the area reported rashes, vomiting, headaches, coughing, and sore throats. MRL said they talked to that person individually, Hodges recalled. Deb Griffin said MRL one-on-one sessions were with MRL claims agents. ACE leaders also met with Watts, Leahy, and Waldron and requested that, upon reentry, a health advisory be issued warning that individuals with pre-existing conditions, the elderly, infants, and all susceptible populations may not want to risk exposure to the former hot zone. This request was denied. On April 27, ACE issued a press release listing 4 updated criteria demands before people were forced to leave motels, noting that while some residents had returned without problems, others experienced recurrent or new health symptoms upon return. ACE asked for a signed document by MRL, EPA, and the Health Department that it was safe to return, especially for those with pre-existing conditions, those with ongoing spill-related health problems, and for the elderly, children, and pregnant women in general. They also asked for independent environmental testing on homes and property, independent baseline medical testing, and that all contaminants be removed from the site before reentry. The Missoulian listed the ACE conditions on April 28 in a back-page report. None of the criteria would be met, and officials reiterated that Alberton was safe. The AP reported about 80 residents balked at returning. In later litigation, MRL said that at the time of evacuation, MRL provided motels, meals, clothing, and visits to doctors. What more could be done, they asked. There is no evidence that somebody came in and asked for something more. ACE had asked for something more. Hodges recalled talking to Jim Carlson of the Health Department about her concerns. I was assuming my house was contaminated, she said. Who's going to clean it? But they turned it into a dust issue. If you don't feel comfortable about cleaning your own home, then you can talk to the railroad about hiring somebody. And they had Alan Anderson come and talk to me, who is the claims guy. And he says, well, I would really be more comfortable cleaning my own home. He says, I don't like strangers in my home. Do you? But if you really feel you don't want to take that on, we can discuss that when the time comes. And what that means, when you're ready to settle. The health department believed there was no contamination beyond the spill site. After 17 days, Hodges still saw a gender split. The men really wanted to go home. They'd had enough. The motels, the small spaces, the kids, restaurant food. But I saw hesitation in the women, she said. One woman pregnant with twins lived by the Natural Pier Bridge. She really didn't want to go home, Hodges said, and she talked to me at some of the last meetings. Her husband started heading her off and not letting her talk to me. Assurances of safety hadn't changed Hodges' mind. I knew that I wasn't going home the day they opened the doors. I was still feeling sick. There was no way. It never even entered my mind that I was going home when that day came. But other people couldn't wait. It never even entered their mind that they wouldn't go home, she said. Hodges' instincts told her something was wrong in Alberton. Early Saturday, Dr. Leda Koken of the Rocky Mountain Poison Control Center sent 2 final updates to the health department. Koken reaffirmed that most people with non-severe exposure would recover completely. Regarding the phenols and chlorophenols at the site, he said, many of these aromatic compounds have a strong odor that can be described as pesticide-like. Cressolate also had a pungent odor. People returning to areas close to the spill may notice a residual odor, he said. Some may experience nausea, vomiting, dizziness, and headache related to the odor. These symptoms would be expected to resolve with removal to fresh air. Koken made no mention of respiratory symptoms. Neither advisory mentioned hypersensitivity to chlorine or other chemicals, but the health department already knew about that. No specialist ever talked to residents about hypersensitivity. Hodges said evacuees were not informed of poison control health advisories. Next time on Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment, we conclude the chapter Going Home, as many residents remain wary of returning to a home they fear is contaminated and which threatens their health. Until then, this is Ron Scholl. Thanks for listening. This podcast is adapted from the book Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. Visit Amazon.com to see the 2-book series. To access support material in the book, such as maps, photos, illustrations, and video links, visit my Facebook page Gas, the true story, or watch my Gas playlist on my YouTube channel at RL Scholl.